Elementary, my dear Watson, is never said in A Study in Scarlet, the first novel where Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson appear in print by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I have never read any Sherlock Holmes, but I've seen a lot of movies and TV shows. Obviously, it's sort of a ubiquitous character. So for this, I'm going to do a quick review here at the start, because as I'm talking to you now, I have finished the novel. But as I was reading it, I actually did a book blog or reaction, whatever you want to call it, not after every chapter, but kind of after every section of the book, because I thought it'd be a very interesting book to see how my perception of the character lines up with how it appears in this first book, and just my thoughts on the book generally. Just for a general review, I would say this is a really entertaining book. It's well written, the vocabulary and diction are very Victorian in a good way. It at times truly is a page turner. There's a weird twist in the middle that I was not ready about that you should watch the review if you want to watch it. I would also say, like, you don't have to be worried about spoilers necessarily. Unless you're like imminently going to read this book, I would say check out the book blog because there's some funny stuff that happens in this book. But honestly, I understand why this is a universally recognized character, why, especially now that it's in the public domain, people want to make shows and movies about it all the time, because it's really captivating. Mystery genre, especially if you're a fan of it, I think you should read this book because it obviously had incredible influence on the Agatha Christie's of the world, or even like if you like Knives Out and the more recent Rian Johnson movies, there's just like a ton of fun stuff here. If you like procedurals on television, I talk about this at the end of my book blog, like CSI, you can see that reflected in this book, or vice versa, you can see Sherlock Holmes reflected in that book. It's a good time. I really enjoy it. I do think it's a bit long. I understand why most Sherlock Holmes products are short stories rather than novels, because this was quite long. There's actually only 4 novels made with Sherlock Holmes. The rest are short stories. I'm not going to rush to another one. I might pick up some short stories. Maybe I'll look at a list to see like which ones are ranked. Actually, let me know if you like are really excited about a particular story that you think I would like. There's also a bunch of fun, just like historical facts about this, such as this is the first time that anyone used a magnifying glass in a book for a mystery purpose, which I think is really great. As I said, you get really good Victorian England feel and some other places that I won't spoil, but I really enjoyed it. For me, this is going to be a long endorsement because I think if you aren't like an immediate fan of the mystery genre, this isn't something you have to like run out and get. But I do think at some point in your life as a reader, you should check out a Sherlock Holmes product, and A Study in Scarlet is a good book. I would recommend, and it is the start, which is really fun. And it's interesting to see how the original Sherlock Holmes character measures up to some of our more contemporary Sherlock Holmes figures, and what that says about our culture and maybe their culture. I just think it's a very fun thing to check out. If you like this book, I would highly recommend checking out the Dresden Files, or vice versa. If you really are a fan of the Dresden Files, probably it's going to be vice versa more on this channel. If you really like the Dresden Files, and a kind of fun mystery element, it's definitely here in Sherlock Holmes, and obviously in a different setting with not as many like fantastical elements, but a really good time. And I think if you like this, you should definitely check out Sherlock Holmes. And now, without further ado, let's get to what I think is a really fun book blog as I react to A Study in Scarlet by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Hello, everyone. Weirdly, I have not had this spoiled for me. Maybe like through osmosis, once I get into the story, I will remember what it is. But at the moment, I don't remember. And this is the first Sir Arthur Conan Doyle I have read. And so I thought it would be good. I read the first chapter, and there were some differences in my perception of what the character was in these books because of, again, cultural osmosis of the Sherlock Holmes character. And so first I wanted to say what I think Sherlock Holmes is and what this book is going to be, and then sort of steadily talk through the reading of it of what it actually is. And I think people will hopefully enjoy that. So my primary exposure to Sherlock Holmes is two sort of mid-2000s, early 2010s works, which is the BBC Sherlock TV series, which has Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock, Martin Freeman as Dr. Watson, and of course the films, Sherlock Holmes and the sequel Game of Shadows, I think, which had Robert Downey Jr. as Sherlock Holmes at the height of his Iron Man strength, popularity, and Jude Law as Dr. Watson. Those are two different takes on Sherlock, so I'm sure there's going to be some sort of warring differences, especially with the original character, because those are reinterpretations. But that's how I view Sherlock Holmes. And in both of those works, Sherlock Holmes tend toward like a classic, I shouldn't say classic, I should say like the normal time period for the late 2000s, early 2010s hero, which is very sure of himself, almost cocky, that he knows best, doesn't communicate very well with those around him about how brilliant he is. In some ways is kind of an action star, like he can also beat people up, especially in the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes they also really, both of those really highlight the drug use, I guess particularly the RDJ one, but also the BBC version has that as a huge emphasis. So like the character of Sherlock Holmes for me is like this very stuck-up, cocky, incredibly smart guy who just goes around knowing everything, solving crimes. But just in the first chapter of A Study in Scarlet, Sherlock Holmes is very different. He is much more, unsurprisingly, sort of this English gentlemanly, and rather than being cocky, he's more simply airy, but not in like a dumb way, just in a like he's not thinking about the world around him in the same way. So a guy named Stanford introduces them to each other, and Stanford just like talks about Holmes in this sort of anticipatory way, but also in a way that like he's just kind of something that people can't understand. He's not like an incredible genius, but he is affable, like the guy likes him, but he does have some eccentricities. And when they meet each other, Sherlock Holmes just has this much more light and silly and sort of fun energy, sort of a comedic sense. I don't know, there's not this cocksure, to use an old-fashioned term, sense to him yet. Maybe that will come later, but that's the biggest thing I found in this first page. I'll try to update you as I read through the book. I'm glad I'm reading it. Oh, good day, sir. Yes, I'm reading Sherlock Holmes. I don't know, it felt like I needed to do something. I have a pipe. I should break through the pipe. I'm reading Sherlock Holmes, right? I should do that. So I've read now the two more chapters, some other observations of Sherlock Holmes for this diary. The first thing, again, sort of, I already emphasized this in my first video, but it's just interesting that Sherlock Holmes is not as much of a like ass to everyone, so to speak, as like the modern Sherlock Holmes takes have him. Specifically, this sentence is said, Holmes was certainly not a difficult man to live with. He was quiet in his ways and his habits were regular. It was rare for him to be up after 10 at night and had invariably breakfasted and gone out before I rose in the morning. So it goes on from there, but it's just so interesting that the beginning of this, in both of, well, at least specifically the Sherlock BBC TV show I'm thinking of, Martin Freeman is immediately annoyed, although fascinated with Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes. And he has all these eccentric things. He has like oddities around the house. It's messy. It's immediate that Sherlock is just sort of this stuck-up guy. And I harp on this because I think this is such an interesting reflection of our time, that the hero, or this guy who knows so much, has to be this complete know-it-all. And with RDJ, like RDJ had just come off of Iron Man and Tony Stark, and that's a similar character. He plays it similarly, I should say, in those movies, just in like the 1800s in England. In the TV show, it's modern. It's a British like version of that, but it's still the same sort of thing. So it's interesting here at the beginning that the first couple of weeks of them living together is like this regular existence. Holmes is actually pretty like isolated. He just kind of, has his breakfast, goes out, comes back, goes to bed early. And maybe that will change. But also that like he doesn't know everything. In both of those versions, at least to my memory, Sherlock Holmes is just a know-it-all. And also just like sort of he knows all facts of everything ever. And specifically, in the second chapter of the first book, it's like he knows a lot about a very specific amount of things, but nothing about anything else. In fact, this joke is great, that My surprise reached a climax, however, when I found, incidentally, that he was ignorant of the Copernican theory and of the composition of the solar system. So he doesn't even know that the sun is the center of the universe. And knows basically nothing about philosophy, astronomy, very little about politics, very little about botany outside of poisons. He doesn't have that great a knowledge of geology. He's not just this know-it-all. He knows a lot about a very specific amount of things. But to the credit of these modern adaptations, in Chapter 3, when we have the first mystery presented at Lauriston Garden, we actually do see the stuck-up Holmes when he does know a lot about, which is observing crime scenes. And that's when we first get, like, he's laughing, playing Lestrade off of Gregson in this scene. And it's very funny because he's very different from what we knew previously. He really likes that he knows a lot about those observations, but it's just not quite in the same way as a 21st century Sherlock Holmes is. The interesting thing about the Doctor so far, Dr. Watson, is we're not getting a lot of his character and backstory. We'll see, I'm sure that's coming up later, but right now he really is just a viewpoint for the reader. We don't know much about him outside of his time in Afghanistan and that he is a army doctor. So that'll be interesting. Moving on. We're not talking a lot about his maladies, like the Sherlock BBC one talks a lot about. It's kind of PTSD, which makes sense with the wars in our current time in Afghanistan and Iraq. But that's not quite communicated yet about this Watson. So there's some things I'm looking out for. I'll keep reading. Did you all know that a key plot point in the first Sherlock Holmes book is the Mormons going to Utah? I am flabbergasted. I just got to the second book or second part, and there are 4 solid chapters on the Mormons going to Utah and how that connects to this murder in London. I am not kidding you. Brigham Young is a character that has dialogue, and not 1, but 2 chapters of the first Sherlock Holmes novel. This is a real section of dialogue from the first Sherlock Holmes novel. "Nigh unto 10,000, said one of the young men, we are the persecuted children of God, the chosen of the angel Moroni." This is blowing my mind. I'm just on chapter 6 of the second book, which is when we get back to London. But the solid chunk, maybe a third of the first Sherlock Holmes novel, is about the Mormons in Utah and the motivation for the murder being that Brigham Young forced one of his Mormon followers to give his child away as a bride to one of the elders' children. That's a real plot point in here. If you have not read this book before, this is like one of the biggest spoilers in like classic literature I've ever had. I had no idea. Why don't people talk about this more? If you've read A Study in Scarlet, were you ready for the Mormon subplot? It's not even a subplot. It's the main plot. Shocking. I cannot believe, maybe like the mystery of the West is like what made the allure in this first one, but it is shocking how much of this book is about the Mormons in Utah. That is nuts. It's good. It's interesting. It's fascinating. I read through it. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is clearly a good writer, but man. Also, obviously, sidebar, and even the footnotes of this Barnes & Noble Classics collection makes fun of Conan Doyle's understanding of the North American continent is not great and very exaggerated, and his understanding of the native people who lived on that land is very not good, and obviously very colonial colored, which makes sense being a late 19th century work. So worth saying that is certainly uncomfortable and not something to praise, but man, I am just shocked. Just finished A Study in Scarlet, and I enjoyed it. I am still shocked that a major part of this work, the major motivation, is about the Mormons in Utah and polygamy, and didn't see that coming. I don't know how that's not just like a cultural thing people talk about, that in the first Sherlock Holmes, the Mormons are a key part of the motivation for the first murder, but it isn't. I didn't know about it, and it was like a really fun, interesting twist. The outline of the book is very simple. The opening chapters are Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes getting to know each other. Then very quickly we move to the murder, which is not like crazy, but there is some mystery to it. We get the whole science of deduction thing. We have a couple of red herrings of what it could be. The second murder, then a large portion, again, in Utah with the Mormons. And then we're back. We have our man, and we get a final explanation of Sherlock Holmes and how he knew from the very start what the actual case was. Pretty simple, and interesting to me how prevalent this storytelling structure still is, particularly in like procedurals on television. Like any CSI episode, any NCIS starts out with introduction of characters, enough so you like them. Then there's a murder. Then you think you're onto something, and then it isn't. Then you get the backstory of why the murder happened, and then at the end, the smart person, the lead, gets to explain how they knew and tell you some sort of lesson. Like seriously, that's like most episodes of TV procedurals. I don't know if Sir Arthur Conan Doyle like invented that, but it's crystallized, it's strong. It's interesting there's only 4 Sherlock Holmes novels, which I sort of understand after having finished this, because 100 pages is a little much for that. A couple things had to be drawn out, particularly the Mormonism and Utah thing. And so I'm excited to get into some of the short stories at some point, because it feels like this is much more suited for short stories, with which Doyle obviously figured out himself, because that's what he primarily wrote. But it's fun. I really enjoyed it. He's a really good writer, which I wasn't ready for. Like the descriptions are very robust. The vocabulary is very fun. It is very Victorian in like the best sense of the term. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm happy that I read A Study in Scarlet. Now, I'm not going to run immediately to any more Sherlock Holmes stuff, but I'm going to have it on the TBR, just ready when I'm feeling like it again. I don't think everyone needs to read Sherlock Holmes. It was very fun, but it wasn't like, whoa, my jaw wasn't on the floor. But like, especially if you like that genre at all, if you like Agatha Christie, if you like mystery, Dresden Files, those sort of things, or you just like a good read, strongly have to recommend Sherlock Holmes, Study in Scarlet. Glad I read it. First in, last out.